Hey, good afternoon, guys. I'm the Tech Prepper. Hope you're all doing well, and happy Memorial Day. So we're going to conclude our digital field exercise series. This is part 3, the after action report. If you guys missed the first 2 videos, you may want to check those out first. And I'm going to warn you right now, there's going to be a lot of content here, but we learned so much in our digital field exercise, and I'm going to go through everything we learned. I even have a bunch of clips from our roundtable, so not sure how I'm going to edit and cut this together, but we will have plenty of information for you guys. So there were 5 total operators that came out on Saturday. We had 2 at net control, and then we had 3 of us go out into the field, and we split up across 3 different stations in the Tonto National Forest. We covered a quarter mile, a half mile, and 1 mile out. So not terribly far, but all of our communications gear did work. Now, we did carry out 11 different digital transmissions using different modes for NBEMS. A lot of cool stuff there. Power-wise, on the low end, on the HT, we only ran 500 milliwatts or half a watt, and the high end, no station exceeded 5 watts. All right, so I have a couple of different buckets here. We're going to start with a general bucket of what went well, what did not go well, and what the takeaway is or what we learned. So first and foremost, the planning was essential. The communications plan and the field manual absolutely helped basically eliminate a lot of issues, in my opinion, that may have come up. About the only thing I'm going to do as the takeaway is make a few additions to the field manual based on some comments I got back from the group. All right, the other great thing about this exercise is that everybody had a good time, nobody got hurt, and the collective in this case turned out to be more powerful than the individual. The coffee and social briefing at the beginning ran a bit long. It was a lot of fun, but I'm going to put that as something that did not quite go well. We started a little bit late, on the order of about 45 minutes. And I guess what we learned here is the group really enjoys tangents, having good fun, and there were too many class clowns in our little briefing. But a lot of fun to have those guys. All stations were able to transmit and receive digital. One of the stations had a little bit more difficult time, but I think we'll chalk that one up to the equipment, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. We found that low power was sufficient given the terrain in my area, so it's good to know that on the low end we were running 500 milliwatts, and we were basically pushing S8, S9, at least as reported to us by net control. One other big takeaway, and I wasn't sure how this would work, is I controlled all of the equipment. I provided all 3 laptops and all 4 stations that were used, and they were all pre-configured for digital. And with the exception of me failing to validate one of the stations, everything pretty much went pretty smoothly. So I think for our next event, what we're going to do is try to do another controlled environment until we have lots of practice and training under our belt. So I would say if you're starting out, if you have a couple of stations, you may want to have one person that really understands the equipment set that up. We had 2 net control operators who were seasoned net control operators, Mike and Paul. Mike was our voice operator and Paul acted as digital. And between the 2 of them, we did not notice any hiccups when we were on the field. Again, we only heard what they wanted us to hear when they clicked that PTT, but they also said it was wonderful not having to worry about the other's responsibility. And if they did, they actually ended up catching something and helping the other net control operator. So in our next event, we're going to staff, again, 2 net control operators to handle those 2 different concerns. One other thing to note is that this entire group has almost no experience with digital or NBEMS or the FL Digi Suite. Myself and Paul had a little bit of experience, but we never got to play with anybody else. So this literally was the first time the 5 of us ever trafficked any data to another ham.
Having 2 people at net control was magnificent. There's no way that either of us, I don't think, could have handled both. But we were cheek by jowl, so when you said ready to send, Paul said, I'm ready. I didn't even try to, I can hardly see the screen, but because I brought the wrong glasses.
Sure.
I didn't bring my desk glasses, but he said, I'm ready to copy, and I could hand it to you.
All right, so let's get into the operating conditions and operating environment. In general, it was pretty good weather. We started out in the mid 60s, and by the end of our day, we were approaching the mid 80s in degrees Fahrenheit. So we did leave early, so it was still very cool. And then the 3 locations we found, we decided to go a little bit farther than the original plan, just to plant ourselves under a tree with a little bit of shade. One of the stations had to deploy his tarp shelter. It was actually the first station because he was the longest in that fixed position. So it was good that he was actually able to properly protect himself and the equipment from the heat. Oh, one big thing. So I say the MVP for this, if we had to do this again, would have been a small folding table for the CF20 Toughbooks. I offered this 1 pound lightweight table to everybody in the group. Everybody declined. And there was a lot of people sitting on a knee and laying on the floor. So I think everybody's going to get themselves this inexpensive table for the next go around, assuming we do the same kind of field exercise. There were some environmental issues that were interesting.
Out in the field.
Out in the field. So before we started this, I asked everybody if they wanted the table. And I knew that the table was going to be a problem and the chair. So especially if we're going to be using the laptops, I think the 3 of us who were basically either lying down or on our knees.
We were in a child's pose.
Yeah,
butts
that's
up,
horrible.
heads down. Yeah,
But either way, you were crouching down like little leopards.
Yeah.
So the table I think was
table and
a
chair.
win, or would have been a win.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's talk about that because you guys did it for the first time of having to pull out all the equipment out of the bag.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on, or maybe we'll start with George. You started out with the HT setup.
I think if I set up my pack for the equipment to begin with, I'd have been in a better place because it ended up sliding down into the front instead of being up on top where it should have been. And the pack is configured for wilderness ops. I mean, food, water, shelter, tools, everything that we need to survive per our protocol when we're out in the wilderness.
Yes.
Never more than, 25 feet you have your pack with you.
Yes.
So I configure that way, this thing stays packed that way all the time. It's about a 25, 30 pound pack without the gear. So had I packed accordingly with the hardware, the chair would have made it. My table's not as flexible as this one, but this one's going with me soon. Anyway.
So if it's missing today.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll send the link up. These are like $30.
Yeah, it's worth it. But I ended up using my my pack and my staff. I drove the staff into the ground, propped the pack against it, and made a desk out of the pack for my table. The chair would have still been valuable, or the tactical knee pads,
Right.
because I was scrounging around in the dirt. Sunshade, because I was the first one in, dropped off, waiting for everybody to go back and then extract. So I put up shelter because it was getting hot and I couldn't see the laptop,
Right.
and the equipment was getting hot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I threw up the shade to make sure that everything was going to stay working and not suffer the heat, including the operator.
Yeah, which is the most.
All right, so our first test was at the Tonto 8 station, the first station, and that essentially was our litmus test to see if we could actually send a CSV form from our station to net control, and that worked beautifully. We did have a couple of issues though. The first issue was that the FT60R was the radio that was used, and the 3.5 millimeter jack that was connected to the DigiRig Mobile backed out a little bit and was transmitting a dead carrier. That is a known issue with these radios, so we went ahead and put a rubber band around it, and the wonderful seasoned net control operators were the ones that caught that dead carrier transmission. So it was nice to actually have both a voice simplex and a digital simplex frequency so that they were able to raise us and let us know that was happening. The other thing to note is that I'm looking at the iLuence HD1 because it has the Motorola style connector, and I also have an adapter to go to Kenwood, and that should fix the issues where the audio cable can be backed out because those connectors are a lot more secure in the way that they are designed. We did have a couple of issues with the initial transmission in making sure we could put the right GPS format. That was my fault. In the communications plan, I did not put that everybody should be expecting decimal degrees, and the operator that was at Tonto had his, through no fault of his own, just set to a different format, degrees, minutes, and seconds. And then Net Control again caught that and said, we want to make sure that that was your intended format, and we acknowledged that it was. The other issue was related more to audio levels on receive, and it had to do with the fact that the volume and squelch are easily bumped on this unit. It's not an issue that we see with the base stations. So that station in particular had issues receiving. But to our knowledge, all of the transmissions he sent were fine. All right, so let's take a look at the next station. This is Mobile 1. Mobile 1 was about a quarter mile from Tonto and a half mile from Net Control, and was running the FT8900 Manpack, CF20, and the DigiRig. And that station was responsible for carrying out 4 tests, and they were primarily tests to try different modes of operation to see which one was the fastest, most reliable, and we got a lot of good data there, and also learned some new things. So first of all, we transmitted, had all the stations configured to transmit the Reed-Solomon ID, which basically is what frequency you're on, what's the center frequency, and what's your mode. And then we also had all of the remote stations configured to automatically switch their modem when they detect the Reed-Solomon ID. And that was absolutely beautiful. Nobody had to reconfigure their receive station when a station was changing their mode of operation. So I would keep on the RS or RXID and the TXID enabled on FL Digi. Now, one issue we did run into, and this was probably the most significant issue, but I'm really proud of David for working through this issue. There was a point in which he was trying to send a transmission and all of the other stations started receiving garbled or gibberish on their FL Digi displays, and we couldn't figure out what it was for a few minutes. Well, it turns out that there are 3 different places where you can set your modem mode, and one was in FL Digi, the other one is the op mode in FL Digi from the main menu, and the third one is at the bottom left of FL Message. And I failed on his machine when I was setting things up to set that FL message mode to MT63. So when he was transmitting, it was actually transmitting that Reed-Solomon ID of saying, hey, switch over to whatever PSK mode, and everybody started seeing gibberish. And it took us a while, or took him and myself a little bit of time to figure out what was going on. So in general, I think the takeaway here is probably to go ahead and make sure that all of those things are set correctly. I had those in my field manual, and I told them, hey, let's skip it. So that one was on me. And I think more importantly, you probably should be driving the mode specifically from FL Message, because it will change it for FL Digi. We did test 4 different modes while I was transitioning from Mobile 1 to my location at Mobile 2. David and the team tried 4 different modes. We tried 8 PSK 1000F, which was blazing fast. We tried, I believe it was also PSK 125 and PSK 250 RC5. They were a bit faster as well. And then MT63 was the slowest. What we found was 8 PSK 1000F was a screamer, but that is at the sacrifice of data robustness and redundancy. In our case, it didn't matter. We had such good conditions that that mode just worked. And in fact, the transmission time for that was 7 seconds end to end based on our test size transmission, compared to MT63, which we were looking at closer to 32 to 33 seconds. So what we've decided to do moving forward is that we will probably use 8 PSK 1000F as our primary digital mode. And if we run into any environmental issues with propagation, we will by design in the SOP and in the field manual drop to MT63 for reliability. Okay, so another thing we found too, for some reason when the mode was switching from MT63 to PSK, it seemed like there was a lot more gibberish coming up on the receive windows for FL Digi, and nobody knew what to do or how to clean it up. I was monitoring as I was going out another half mile, And I remembered on the bottom right in FL Digi, there is a squelch slider that's positioned vertically. And all I did was pop on the simplex frequency and say, hey, just adjust it a little bit until it goes away. And then Net Control may have relayed it, or I think everybody else received my voice recommendation, and we were back in business. So that squelch lever is important, especially if you're dealing with the PSK modes. We didn't see it when we were working with MT63.
8 PSK 1000F. Wow. That just screamed, got it done.
Mine was like 2 seconds,
over
and you got
with.
it in 7 seconds total.
It also might be beneficial to have some way to hear the transmit audio if you're operating off of a handheld. I had to bring up my second band on my HT that we were using for voice
Yes.
to verify squelch on the unit plugged into the machine, because try as I might to dial it just right, I couldn't get the feel for it, and it's probably my old eyes, but I could not find the sweet spot of where I didn't have squelch or had too much squelch, it didn't sound right. It's an experience thing with the tones of the modem, but I was dialing blind and just watching because there's no fine tuning.
Yeah.
Right.
But when I
right.
brought up second band on my HT, I could hear what we were doing and understand better where my squelch should be and my volume on the HT. I think at one point when I was trying to get ready for the second test, I cranked the volume all the way up, moving it around. So much noise coming out of that thing. So when I changed my volume and was able to adjust auditorily,
That's a word. It is now.
It is now.
my ears made good things. So I was able to tune it and then troubleshoot the station without any kind of audio feedback.
Yeah.
You're deaf.
It's
literally.
feedback.
Would there be a point in Net Control transmitting a tone and you adjust so that you can hear the tone and yet get rid of the noise?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just for yourself, but for people out in the field. Here's what you get to calibrate to. I'm going to transmit a tone. Set your squelch up high enough, so, but not so high that the tone goes up.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we want to do it both ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You want to have all the stations be able to calibrate their transmit signal and then their receive signal.
Okay, make sure your squelch is in between.
Is
Good.
that tone a specific hertz or
Yes.
something? Okay.
And it's, I forget the nomenclature, but it is set high enough where there is no modem tone
Okay.
that's higher than that. So if you're able to calibrate it with that highest tune tone, everything below it should work.
Yeah. All right.
If that makes
Okay.
sense.
That's a band pass thing.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so let's talk about Mobile 2. That was my position. I was located about a mile from Net Control and about a half mile from Mobile 1. I carried with me the FT60R, which I acoustically coupled to my Android phone running and FL message. Now, I was able to send my CSV payload acoustically coupled, and all the stations were able to receive that message. Later in the day, Net Control decided to do a recap of everything they heard, and they sent across an ICS 213 form. I was also able to decode and receive that. One other thing to note, Net Control did recognize that my audio was a little bit lower in terms of amplitude compared to other stations, and it primarily has to do with the way that I was not positioning the Android phone speaker directly to the mic on the FT60R. And in fact, I even had a viewer. Let me see, I want to get his name right. So it was Viron Payne via YouTube. And he basically said, low audio acoustically coupling the phone to an HT can be resolved by moving the phone mic, which is probably a little closer to the bottom of the phone, closer to the HT speaker. And he was absolutely right. So acoustic coupling in a pinch without any specialized hardware will work just fine, assuming you're able to properly adjust the audio levels and position the phone correctly.
Okay, we found out that audio coupled works at least about 50% of the time. There were some times that it didn't work for you.
Correct.
But when it didn't work, it may very well have been related to the ICS 213 form, because that seemed to cack. You had troubles copying it.
No. I copied the ICS 213 form fine.
You did, yeah.
Every time.
But you didn't transmit it back
I had
well.
difficulty transmitting it
Right.
back
Exactly.
out on
Yeah.
FT63.
Exactly.
So that's something to look
Strange.
at.
Yeah.
The only one time I could not receive was when I had turned the volume knob on my HT to max.
Yes.
And I was blowing out the front end. So that was my fault. Earlier I had it at a point where it was
Right.
decoding.
Yeah, Dave told us
Everything.
about that.
Yeah.
What's weird?
Now, the next test we did was with net control sending out an ICS 213 form, and the goal of this exercise was, one, we had not trafficked any other forms but CSV up until this point, so that was new for us, and we also wanted to see if net control could distribute a summary of all of the activities we had carried out so far. So by this point, I think we had already done 9 or 10 successful transmissions digitally. Now, I was able to receive that beautifully with acoustically coupled with the Android phone. Mobile One was able to receive and decode it in FL message, but he never saw it pop on the form. Again, that was my fault, and in the clip here, you'll see why in a minute. Tonto Station did not copy, and again, it was just because of the bumped volume and squelch on the HT. And again, my recommendation there is if you can get by with a base station that has a data port, you solve a lot of these accidental volume issues. The other thing you can do is create for yourself a doping chart where you mark down in your field notes exactly what audio position works really well based on historical use.
When we sent that ICS, how many words were in that ICS, do you think? A dozen? No, 2 dozen words?
Yeah, something like that. 24.
35 seconds. And the software said it was 33, which is exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Now, you copied
That's
the
Just the
ICS form,
Oh, all right.
but you couldn't transmit it back to us.
Correct.
The reason for that was simple. He was missing a setting on his machine that did not launch FL message by default. So there's a configuration in FL Digi for NBEMS that says when you receive an FL message, open up the application. That checkbox was not ticked. So we could see receipt in our receive window in FL Digi, but it wasn't firing up FL message, and we couldn't figure out how to open it. So communication-wise, I went through, if I had turned on that one setting, which was in our SOP, and I said,
Right.
let's just skip it. I'm sure I have it configured.
And he was the boss, so
Yeah.
I'm the noob.
yes, it does.
Okay. The relay worked, but there was one part of the relay that was an issue. So we sent out a message, and I forgot. I think you sent it back.
I sent it back, but I only did, I guess,
The record.
the record,
Yeah.
the row,
Yeah.
versus the whole thing. Yeah, right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You just sent the payload, and,
Right.
and your software wrapped
Yeah,
all the pre and
Right.
post amble. We received it, but you didn't.
yeah.
And that surprised me. And the only thing I could figure, I guessed, was that you were in a bowl where your his signal quality went over your head, but didn't get into where you were.
It could be when I was messing with my configuration too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I wouldn't put too much stock in that.
No.
Okay.
All right, so let's get into some miscellaneous bits here. We had a question about the file name we were using when we were sending off the message, either in CSV or the ICS 213 form. And what we found was that in FL message under call, you can absolutely put in your tactical call sign, maybe an underscore, and then your call, and all of that would be messaged. And that would allow all of the other stations to reliably know exactly what tactical station was sending it out, and if they wanted to also have the call sign, your FCC call sign, which would also make you legal if you don't include that anywhere else. All right, so the user interface was also interesting. I had talked about this previously when I got into MCOM tools development, where I said all of this ham radio software out there is fantastic, but the one problem we have with it in the field is that the menus are too small. They're too small to manipulate with fingers on a touch display. They're also very difficult to read. Everybody had issues with their vision, myself included. I brought my cool, I don't know if I'm wearing them, my sunglasses and not my normal eyeglasses, and I even had a hard time reading the small display. So the MCOM Tools software project that I'm working on will use FL Message, FL Digi, FL Wrap all under the hood, but the display now is going to be purpose-built to allow us to have larger fonts and a more simplified interface. Now, Mike made a great suggestion. He says, hey, if you go that route, make sure you reintroduce the squelch knob, because that will be key to adjust your receive quality. And he's absolutely right. So I'm glad we have this exercise to get a second pair of eyes. In terms of the screen size, there's another option. We are running the CF20 Toughbooks, which is a 10.1 inch screen. There's also a CF33 that I just found out that basically has the same guts, specs. It's another hybrid laptop where it converts to a tablet, and that screen is larger, so that may be an option. Or these laptops have a audio or video out, so you can attach a secondary larger display if you need more screen real estate. And that's probably only appropriate for net control.
You know, Gaston, when we were talking, that there's enough, this shows there's enough, right, with that interface, there's enough things that you can bump that can go wrong, that I can see the impetus for saying, can you put a front end on that that is not as fidgety, because it can be very easy. I'm glad you clued us in, and I appreciated that on the squelch, because that was exactly what it was.
Right.
Was we're getting all that noise, and we didn't know how to reset the squelch, and then, okay, that's one of the settings, or,
Yeah.
you know.
All right, so what are the next steps? Well, we're going to do this again. Probably we lost our window because it's summer here in the Sonoran Desert and way too hot. But our local group, our Arizona Emergency Net Maricopa County, we get together every Monday night to train on the Metrolink repeater system, but we also have exercises occasionally at a park on a weekend. So we're planning on taking these same 5 gentlemen, myself included, and doing a train-the-trainer exercise, and hopefully getting probably another 5 or 6 people that are willing to pair with that. So we can train another net control operator, and we could have a couple of other people shadow each of the mobile stations. Other takeaways I need to update the field manual, which I will circulate online as soon as it's in good shape, based on all the lessons learned and some things I was missing. I'll even circulate the communications plan if it's helpful for you guys. And from there, we're probably going to make the case to the ARA to allow us to conduct some regular training nets on the repeater system, because it's too difficult for us to do this on simplex without people driving to other people's homes. We're just spread too far out across the state. Yeah, so I think that's it for our immediate next steps over the next 4 months or so. We'll probably reconvene in the fall when it's cooler. But with that said, guys, I really want to thank Paul, Mike, George, and David for coming out, and for everybody watching this really long and probably somewhat boring after action report. All right, guys, I'm the Tech Prepper. Be strong, be safe, and be prepared.
That wouldn't be wise.
But I wouldn't roll this out to an event first. I'd roll it out to our simulations and drills,
Right.
and
Yeah.
the park activities,
Yeah.
and get more recruits and more folks exposed, and therefore interested, and therefore trained, and therefore experienced. And now you have a cadre of people who can
I love that
support
word.
this.
I love that word. too.
Cadre's fun to say.
Yeah,
And-
because you spell it in your head when you say it, don't you?